Good morning. Today we're going to talk about observations and using the credential tool. In the credential process, we have three ways to show competence. Using the tool is going to be one of them. So the first one is documentation. So that's the portfolio and resource file. The second one is articulation. So how the candidate is able to answer interview questions. And then the third is our observation. So these are going to be reflected in the advisor and the endorser's notes in the tool. The first thing we want to talk about is why we observe. The first reason is to assess the learning needs. Observations also offer a basis for practical coaching to improve quality. It's going to help them to fulfill the credential requirements as well. Your purpose in observing a candidate in his or her work environment is really to gather information about the candidate. So you want to understand how they manage health and safety, how they interact with children, how they interact with parents, and how he or she guides learning and the well-being of children. We want to remember that when we observe, we're not judging. In fact, really, we're just kind of describing what we see. Later, when you meet with the candidate to discuss your observations, then you can work on interpreting what you've seen and coming up with a plan for the candidate's growth. So the requirements for advisor observations. So you are required to do a minimum of 3 visits. Many times it takes a few more than 3, but the minimum is 3 visits. Each of these visits must be a minimum of 2 hours. They must be within the same school year, with the same general group of children on a typical day. So by that, we really mean that we don't want to go in on a day that they're doing a talent show or having a dinner that they don't usually have. We want to see the regular events of a regular day. You also are going to be responsible for having a coaching advisement session after each visit. And typically, most advisors will do at least 1 observation in the first semester and then 2 in the second semester. Guidelines. Remember, you're trying to become familiar with the program. You kind of want to blend into the woodwork, resist the temptation to interact with children and staff. You may have some questions. A lot of times it's best to wait till the end to ask. But you kind of want to be quiet, sit back, listen, watch, and start marking off as the candidate is displaying abilities in each of the skill areas. Not only do you want to watch the candidate, but you're going to want to watch the children. Watch their experiences, watch what they're doing, and the interactions between the students and the candidate. If you have questions, mark them in the tool and save them for your advisement session afterwards. You're also going to want to move around to observe various parts of the program. You're going to want to see the candidate in various parts of the program. There are going to be times when your focus may be taken away from the candidate, especially when we have programs where maybe other staff aren't practicing best practice. But you're going to want to keep your focus on the candidate, what they're doing and what their interactions look like. So filling out the tool. So again, reminders. Your dates must be within the same program year, 3 weeks apart, and 3 observations. So you'll note on the front of the observation tool now, it does say date of observation 1, date of observation 2, and 3, and if you have additionals, you can mark them on there as well. And we do request that we have the start and end time of that actual observation so that we know that you're spending enough time in the program to really see what's going on. Every time you go into the program, we ask that you use a different colored ink to make notes. This will help us to reconstruct what happened each visit, and it'll allow us to see growth in the candidate. So for example, here you can see, the first observation is all done in red, the second in blue, and the third in green. So once we get into the tool, we could really see what happened each time the advisor was in the program. The third thing, by that last visit, again, each competency must be rated and have notes. So if you see here, here's our competency standard. There needs to be notes for each one. We don't necessarily need to see notes on each of the indicators, but each standard, right here, standards are numbered, those must have a final number in them, and there must be notes for each one. So again, competency standard is the numbered. Indicators. You should start checking off the indicators as you observe them. And you should also make notes about what you see and hear, or what you don't see or hear for that matter. So again, the indicators are the ones right down the side. These are the check boxes. Remember that all indicators don't have to be checked off. That the candidate is responsible for meeting the standard. So making notes. You're going to want to make sure that you have brief examples of what the candidate did, quotes of what the candidate said, and if you mark DNA, you need to note why. You can note if the competency is out of the candidate's control, so storage space, for example. If the program only has one cabinet and they've advocated for space and there's nothing else we can do about it, we just want to note that. And then hopefully your candidate will be able to discuss best practice and what they would like to have if they could have it. And then any improvements made since the visit prior. So again, if you look here, we'll note that the indicator is checked off and that we have notes written in each one. So you can see that they're pretty specific. So if you look down below, it says, there's a cozy corner in the back of the cafeteria, 1 rug on the floor, 2 beanbag chairs, and 4 children are utilizing the space. Up here, we see that there's 2 homework tables. Each has a labeled bin, and children are going to the space when they arrive. These notes clearly show what we're seeing in program. So scoring the tool. For a 1 means rarely. So that means while observing, you saw the candidate do something infrequently or take inappropriate action. A 2 means sometimes, that you saw some evidence of the action. And 3 is mostly, you saw the candidate repeatedly demonstrate the behavior described. So typically, if you're checking off all the indicators in a standard, you might score the competency as a 3. But not always. Just because you observed an indicator doesn't mean that you have observed the candidate taking that action repeatedly or consistently. In those cases, you might score it a 1 or a 2, which is why we typically tell advisors not to score the tool until, close to those final, at least the 3rd observation, sometimes not until the 4th or the 5th. So if you'll see here, all of the indicators were checked off, and there are lots of notes to support that the candidate is providing space in which the children can enjoy quiet and privacy. So because we were able to see this consistently, and I know that we're able to see it consistently, as we see, we have 3 different colors here, which means it was happening on 3 different occasions. We were able to score the standard at a 3. There also is an I for scoring the tool. I says that there needs to be follow-up documentation or an interview. So typically these are where you have your question marks on your tool. But while you're observing, if you plug in an I to remind yourself that you need more information, you might find this information in the candidate's documentation. So if you're looking in the portfolio or resource file, or it might be something that you need to interview the candidate about. The I really is just for you to remember to ask those follow-up questions or look for those follow-up notes. You must put notes in your tool once you've followed up with a candidate, and a score must be written in. So an I really is just for your reminder, but eventually you're going to need to put a number in that tool before you turn it in. DNA. So this is from what you're able to observe, the competency doesn't apply to the candidate. You're going to want to ask the candidate to explain or document how it applies to how he or she demonstrates the competency in his work or her work. But you're going to want to follow up to make sure that it really doesn't apply to their situation. There's really only a few standards that this might apply to. So you really want to gather as much information as you can before you write does not apply. So just as reminders, anything marked with an I or a DNA needs some type of follow-up. You're going to ask the candidate open-ended questions to explain the situation you marked, and then write in your notes next to the I or the DNA. So here's just an example of a DNA. So develops a responsive, high-quality program. So we have here that Sarah is an activities assistant. She explained that her supervisor has been at the same school for 5 years and fostered relationships with the principals, school teachers, and custodians. The custodian even gives her a calendar with events that may interrupt the after-school program. Let me go back a little bit. So once they've written the DNA in, so maybe we thought it doesn't apply, but it looks like that the supervisor has taken care of some of these things. So there are notes that kind of support why the DNA was selected for down here. All right, by the last visit. So bold indicators also must have notes. So I want you to keep in mind that all of the indicators that are bolded, we've indicated for a reason. This is because these are things that need to be seen consistently or things that probably need to be followed up with in one way, shape, or form. The reason that we've asked you to fill in notes for all of the bolded indicators is because the endorser will probably have a hard time finding this information in one observation. You, as the advisor, have time to spend with the candidate, so you're able to have time to ask questions and get this information for them. So, hopefully on the day of the endorsement visit, the candidate is going to show up on time. That being said, occasionally when advisement happens, maybe our students don't show up on time. Or maybe they do, and this gives us the opportunity to show that they are doing that. Same thing down here. So regularly attending conferences. That's not something that the endorser is going to see on the day of their visit. Reading professional journals, same thing. They may have the opportunity to write about it in their portfolio, or maybe something in their resource file, but we want to make sure that these notes are filled in so that the endorser on the day of the visit has as much information as they possibly could. So after your last visit, you're going to want to make sure to fill out the advisor summary. You're going to assist in the creation of goals. And it is your responsibility to double check the portfolio and resource file. You really want to make sure that you look at the portfolio and resource file in its entirety, you want to make sure that it's in order and everything is there. You're also going to help the candidate ensure that they have all of their paperwork for their request for visit. Then you're also going to remind them that all documents need to be mailed in one document, one PDF file to me. Again, you know, we do request that it comes in one or as few as possible, so that once we send it off to the endorser, that it's easier for them. So thanks for joining me today. Should you have any questions, you can always email me at erin@networkforyousuccess.org or give me a call at 518-694-0660. Thanks.